I've heard countless street photographers tell you that your images need to tell a story and that without a story they're just pointless images. And as much as I don't like to agree with that, having a story that is in an image in one way or another really does help convey your message or a message to someone viewing your images. If you're just taking pictures for yourself, then take it because it means something to you or because you like the image, and for the most part you should be doing that anyway. But if you can portray the image that it tells a story, or the viewer can make up something in their head that they're like, oh, this is happening because of this, your images are going to become more interesting. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, how you can convey a story in different ways. You don't have to be proper documentarian style photography to get right up in someone's face when something's going on, like a protest or anything like that, to tell a story. It can be done in so many different ways, and that's what this video is all about. For me, as you know, I shoot a scene and I wait for the right subject in that scene. I don't go around hunting people, and I certainly don't get right up close to people in all scenarios. So how do I portray a story? And usually that's using light and shadow to create mystery and hide elements of an image and highlight others. So I would wait for a subject to enter a certain area of light to tell a story that way, like, oh, where's he going? Is he walking in this direction? You know, for example, this image in Greece, he's wearing no shoes. The actual character was great, but I sat there and waited for ages to get that shot. And it worked out really well. There's nothing else around. He's isolated on that path in one of the spotlights, and you can see that half of him's in darkness, half of him's in light. He's wearing clothes because he's living on the streets. He's got no shoes on. His clothes are ripped. All of that sort of stuff you can see from that image, and it'll tell a story. You can make up your own story. For me, I thought he was traveling a far distance to get to his destination. You guys can make up your own stories, and I think that's the beauty of the whole your images must tell a story, because they don't have to tell the same story for everyone. It can be one time a picture might mean something, and then later down the line you change that meaning even in your own head. So there's plenty of reasons an image can tell a story, but the main reason I use is light and shadow to create mystery and depth in an image that way. And I think another great way of telling a story in your image without being blatant that you're telling a story is just having things that don't quite add up to the scene around you. So for example, this shot was taken in Rye down the south of England, and it's a lady asleep inside of a graveyard. That in itself is a story. She's sunbathing, she's having a nice kip, but surrounded by graves and tombstones. So it don't add up because she's laying where the dead are laying, but she's not dead, you know? It's those sorts of things, looking for that, things that don't add up in the scene around you that can create an easy storytelling opportunity. People can make their own assumptions on what your images look like, but that image specifically that I took is pretty much everyone goes to that. Well, what's she asleep there for, you know? It's got a bit of humour to it, although be it some dark humour. It's also, yeah, it tells a story and conveys emotions from your viewer as well. Another thing that you can do is have people interacting with other people. Usually I like a solitary subject, but when you see facial expressions on other people when they're interacting with each other, it tells a great story. Or even interacting with you as a photographer. So I'll give you two examples of this. This image that I took in the Nights of Soho, very early on into my photography career, if you will, there is a couple that are having dinner, but they don't actually look happy with each other. The woman looks like she's about to hit the bloke, and the guy is sitting there trying to argue his point. Who knows if that's actually what was happening? They could have just been having a really in-depth discussion, and I took the photo right at the right point where their facial expressions matched up, that they just didn't look happy. Maybe I caught the mix of a really heavy breakup. Who knows? But the way their facial expressions and the way they're interacting with each other tells a story. And at the same time, although it's close and it's primarily focused on those two subjects and nothing else around them rather than the scene as a whole and someone little in a corner, these people were not intruded on, you know? There was no intrusiveness to that image. I was outside, they were inside, they were sitting by a window. I was quite a few feet away from them. I didn't get right up in their face with a flash, for example. I was still out of the scene. I didn't interrupt it. I just captured it as it was happening. And then another option that has people interacting with things is people interacting with you itself. So this image here was taken, and it was me just walking around on a lunch break one day, and this lady was shining this man's shoes. She saw me as I was taking the picture, and she was like putting her hand up saying, "No, don't take my picture." That itself is telling a story. Not like the story of what she's doing, but at the same time, why is she shining the shoes if, you know, in a very public area where everyone goes to take photos if she doesn't want a picture taken? And that's interesting in itself. Maybe she's a spy, you know, all these sort of silly things that you can make up in your head that tells a story in its own right. I think that's pretty cool. And then of course you've got ways where opposites attract, is what the word I would use. So if you've got two subjects that are wearing complete opposite clothing, like this prime example in Covent Garden here that I took, again, very early on into my photography career, they're completely the opposite characters, but they work so well being next to each other. You got the person on the right that is just completely covered in colour, almost horrifically, if you will, but then the person in the shadows of that image, closer to the buildings, is all in darkness. Even their phones, the red phone in the person in the light and all the colour, and the woman has her phone in the darkness but has a black phone. All of those things lined up perfectly in that image, and getting things like that can really tell an interesting story. It can really portray something to your viewers and make them look at it for more than a couple of seconds as they're scrolling through Instagram. Another thing that I do want to touch on is the whole telling a story by setting up the scene. And you can set the scene up in many different ways, but if you're hunting around, you're less likely to be able to tell a story with your images unless you're right up close to people. But if you're setting the scene and waiting for a subject that matches, or as I mentioned earlier, completely doesn't match the scene, then that stands out and tells your story for you, if you will, and it makes it a whole lot easier. For example, you could do this in many different ways. Use your travels if you go abroad as a perfect opportunity to do this. Use landmarks that people can relate to, and people can go, "Oh, I recognize that." That helps with telling the story because instantly they're like, "Oh, I've been there," or "Oh, I know that place." And it helps them relate a little bit. And then you can think of, on top of what I just said, areas that you're going are usually more prominent with certain things. So for example, if you're traveling around Europe, you know that certain European countries are absolutely filled with churches, as a prime example. You can go there for a really somber, hard-hitting message if you want to tell a story. For example, here in Greece, we went to the top of a hill. There was a small little church right at the top of this big hill, and when we got to the top, there was a person lighting a candle. It took that whole scene. You can tell he was in a church, he's lighting a candle for remembrance, and that tells you a story. A really good image, and one of my favourites that I took on that Greece trip. And then of course you've got weather and time of day in any location that you go to. And again, if you're traveling into a typically hot climate location, then you can go to places where you know people are either going to be having, you know, an ice cream by the beach or something like that, and using that to tell a story. A great photographer that I know is Dan Baker. He made his career by walking the same 800 meters of beach pretty much in Cleethorpes up north of England, and he has a whole selection of images where he just takes photos of dropped ice creams, and it tells such a story. Even though it's literally just an ice cream on the floor just dropped and left, there's a whole story behind that. What if a kid dropped an ice cream, you know, and it's ruined their whole day, or all of that? There's a whole story behind a very simple image. And in summertime, it's very hustle and bustle on that seafront, and you get tons of pictures where people are in it. And then in winter, nothing. It's almost like an abandoned place where there's almost no human element apart from the structures on that beach. Doing something like that is a very interesting way to tell a story. Also, when I go to places that are cold and you see people all wrapped up and, you know, huddling together for warmth, that tells a story. Or if I go to somewhere really hot and I'm walking through a park and you can see people sunbathing, again, I'll go back to the person in the graveyard. It's telling a story. And you're matching the expressions with the surroundings and what's going on. If you're telling someone through an image that it was a really hot day that day, and you can tell by this and that and this and that, the person's going to be immersed in the image when they're looking at it. And it's just, yeah, it's a really subtle but interesting way to tell a story. And you can also use time of year to tell a story also. Christmas time, people wearing Santa hats, you know. Again, another early image of mine was this bus driver wearing a Santa's hat, looking directly at the image. He's got a grey beard, looks like Santa. And yeah, he's got direct eye contact with the camera, almost got a little grin on his face. He looks quite jolly, and he looks like he's happy what he's doing. But all the reflections and of the buildings around Piccadilly where the image was taken, it's quite an interesting image just to look at, because there's so much going on and you have to really focus on the driver and everything around him to see that he's actually in a bus. And it just takes, you know, it's like not one of those things that you can just glance at once and instantly know what's going on in the image. It's one that you have to focus on. And if you can get some more abstract work like that, where people actually have to put the time in to look into what's going on in the image, the more time people are looking at an image, the better their mind is going to be working around on what's going on, making up their own stories, identifying it in their own way, and making it, you know, their own story, if you will. So all of those sorts of things really work well, and it's stuff that, you know, just day to day, oh, it's cloudy out, or oh, it's wet out. All of those different things, you can tell different stories with your images just by the weather, just by the season, everything like that. And then we'll come on to my preferred way of telling a story, and as I briefly touched on it earlier, using light and shadow and then colour, all in a combination, can tell a great story, and it creates mystery, and that's how you tell your story. So using light and shadow is nothing new. People do that all the time, but if you use it to either draw someone away from an element and draw them to something else when it's happening in a scene, then that's an easy way to get viewers to just, you know, be brought to what you want them to see. You can use the blocking technique to take away half of an image, or you can use a beam of light to encapsulate a subject, and all of those things can be like, oh wow, that's not only interesting and good to look at, but, you know, what's happening in this scene. And using minimalism in that way can make people think, well, why are they walking into the darkness? What's in this darkness? Where are they going? That's so, you know, they're walking out of the light into the dark, or vice versa. What are they, you know, what are they going from and going to? And it's the unknown that gets people's heads moving and gets them thinking, oh, ooh, where are they going? What are they doing? And I think that's my preferred way of telling a story with my images without actually going up and physically taking a photo of an event going on. Because if you're just taking photos of events going on, like protests or people in dire situations, then you're more of a documentarian style photographer than just a general street photographer. And if that's your thing, great, go for it. It's just not mine. And I know a lot of people that are like me and don't just go up to people right in their face or capture events. They hear that by all these big photographers that your photos need to tell a story, otherwise they're not interesting, but they don't know how to tell a story if there's not a physical event going on. So I hope this video actually helps you understand that there's plenty of ways to do it in more subtle ways. And to back this up, I'm going to put a few images on screen, and I'm going to leave them on there for a little bit. And I just want you to either think to yourself what that image means to you, what story is going on in that image, and then you can leave it in the comments if you want, or you can just leave it in your head. But it's worth looking at, because these are images that don't directly tell a story, but you can make up a story in your head. And it's usually, you know, something that you're doing subconsciously, like you're looking at an image and thoughts are going around in your head, not just how the image was taken and the composition, but what's going on, and you're adapting it and you're making it your own. So yeah, there's going to be 4 or 5 images now. Let me know, or keep it to yourself, but I hope this video helped. And if you did like it, likes always appreciated. Subscribe, watch my other videos, we're trying to get the watch time up, And other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.